What is going on? Happy Saturday. I feel like it's been a long time since we've been on here. I think it's been 2 weeks since I've done one of these. So super excited to be back. YouTube, what is good? Facebook, what's good? As you guys hop on, let me know, comment down below. And if you're listening in the podcast form, I do these live. I'm going to start doing them every Thursday. Just a heads up, the day is going to change a little bit as far as the live Q&As. But as of right now, it's on Saturday. But if you want to tune in the future, it's likely going to be on a Thursday evening. So just a heads up there. But as y'all come on, let me know what questions you got nutrition-wise. And again, if you're listening to the past replay of this, I do these live. So if you want to ask me questions directly, stop by on Thursdays. I'll keep posting on a time. But yeah, I'm excited to dive into what we got today. Looks like we already got 5 people in here, which is dope. As y'all come on, comment down below. Say what's up. Billy, what's good? I appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate it. And yeah. Oh, also, if you haven't yet, hoopsquiz.com. I'm going to toss up the banner right now. Go there after you're done here and check that out. Take that quiz, 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long, and you'll get that free video series as well. So I would highly recommend doing that if you're a hooper who is really serious about finding out what the biggest mistake you're making is and fixing that. So definitely check that out. And if you're new around here, hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube. I would appreciate it. And without any further ado, let's get into some of the questions from today. And as y'all have questions when you're watching, comment down below and I'll answer them. I'll prioritize the questions I get live. So if you have any questions, let me know. Now, getting into today's questions. Let me pull up the questions box on Instagram. All right, so this one, we'll start off with this easy one, a simple one, asking what are the highest calorie dense foods? So for those of you that may not know what does calorie dense mean, what we're pretty much looking for there is what foods are like the smallest volume, but have a lot of calories in them. Like a perfect example of this is peanut butter. The serving size really isn't that big volume-wise. Like it's a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons. Not a huge amount physically, but that'll get you about 200 calories in that super small amount. So that can be good in some cases, but it can be not so great in other cases. And other foods like that are any sort of nut butter, so peanut butter, almond butter, sunflower butter, cashew butter, you name it, it's going to be pretty calorie dense. Same thing with just regular nuts. So almonds, peanuts, cashews, things of that nature. Other things that I would consider calorie dense would be oils. So olive oil, for example, 1 tablespoon will get you 120 calories and 13, 14 grams of fat. So it's pretty calorie dense as well. And other things I would consider calorie dense, maybe it's not the most calorie dense, but white rice is up there because it's pretty easy to eat a lot of it and get a lot of calories in, get a lot of carbohydrates in without feeling super full. And that's where they can be helpful. So as a basketball player, oftentimes you run into the feeling of knowing you need to eat more. You understand that you shouldn't be in a calorie deficit. Maybe you want to gain muscle. Maybe you want to perform better and you're under eating, but the appetite isn't quite there. And how we get around that is by using these calorie dense foods. And that can be a good way to troubleshoot that situation because if it's more calorie dense, you're going to get more calories in while not feeling as full. You can kind of circumvent that lack of appetite. So that's a really helpful situation. Now, situations where it might not be helpful and it might actually be harmful is if you're trying to lose body fat. You don't really want to go for super calorie dense foods in that situation, especially if you're on a relatively lower calorie diet, which you probably are in a fat loss phase. You don't want to really make up most of your diet from calorie dense foods because it's going to make it so you're feeling hungry more often. And that's just not going to be a really good look from an adherence standpoint in your ability to actually stick to the plan. So they can be a really helpful tool in some cases and a really annoying obstacle in other cases. And that's where the individuality of nutrition and really understanding what your goal is and what you need to do to support that goal becomes really important. So just to give a solid answer, but like what are the highest like calorie dense foods? So like I was saying, nut butters and nuts in general, any sort of oil is going to be pretty calorie dense. I'm trying to think. Any sort of ultra processed food. So I wouldn't make this a staple part of your diet, but any sort of ultra processed food is typically pretty calorie dense and they're pretty easy to overeat, which again, it can make them pretty tricky if you're in a fat loss phase. And even if you're not in a fat loss phase, I wouldn't go crazy with ultra processed foods. You can kind of implement some more of them if you're really struggling to meet your calorie needs. But I wouldn't make that a staple in your diet. I don't know if I would say this is calorie dense, but another food that I like to implement in that situation where we're trying to get calories up a bit is some sort of liquid calories. So some sort of smoothie, some sort of shake. I posted, if you haven't yet, check out Twitter. I've been sending that shake recipe out to pretty much everyone who responds to that tweet. So go check that out if you want. But shakes and smoothies are a really good way to increase your calorie intake without feeling super full. And I'd have to say those are probably my favorite, because you can get a lot of different foods in there. You can get a pretty balanced meal in a smoothie without really trying all that hard. So I would say those are my favorite calorie dense foods, and hopefully that makes sense as far as where you'd want to use them versus where you'd want to stay away from them. And on the flip side, foods that are not as calorie dense, things like lean protein sources. It's very difficult to overeat chicken breast. If you've tried, it's a bold move, but it's pretty hard to do. Same thing with fruits and vegetables. They're really difficult to overeat. Like, compare apple juice and apples. Apple juice you could drink and easily hit 100, 200, 300, 400 calories without even really trying and not being super full. Try to eat 4 apples. That's pretty hard. You have to actively try to do that. And even then, it's not pleasant. So you're probably not going to do it. But hopefully that makes sense. And again, it's really context dependent, but it should be a pretty simple concept to wrap your head around. Maddie was good. As always, appreciate you tuning in, asking these questions. Let's see. Is there any way we can use nutrition to reduce mucus production during our workouts, especially during conditioning? Side note, does dairy cause more mucus production? To be completely honest, I'm not aware of like a nutrition hack to avoid that. I notice anecdotally when I eat, sometimes I'll be a little bit more like off, like clear my throat or something. I don't know if that's a direct result of the food that you're eating and like eating specific like dairy or something like that, but that's not something I would overthink. If you notice a specific food causes that for you, then maybe try experimenting not having that around your workout and see if that helps. But I wouldn't go as far as to say like a certain food is 100% going to cause it. I'm sure there's some out there, but I'm not aware of any. What time will the nutrition Q&As be on Thursday? I'm thinking either 4:30 or 5 Pacific time. So that way it's a good balance. So everyone Pacific time, Central time, Eastern time can be able to tune in. So that's what I'm thinking right now. It's not really set in stone just yet. I'm probably going to test out different times. So this week I'm thinking, or this coming week, I'm thinking I'm going to try 5 and just see how that works. If we get a good turnout for that, I'll keep going with that, and then we'll kind of tweak it there. Because what I found is I'm a lot more likely. So what I found in my content is that my Thursday YouTube videos perform like crap. It's crazy. Like if you go back and look at my YouTube video from Thursday, you'll see it has like 40 views when the one on Tuesday has like 140 views. And that's a common pattern I've been seeing. So I'm just testing it out. I'm going to go down to 2 YouTube videos a week. So Tuesday and Saturday, and then have the live be kind of like the video for Thursday. And I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, Tommy, you're cutting back content, but I'm actually going to be adding more content on social. I'm going to be starting maybe this week, a blog article. So there's going to be actually more content coming out as a result of that. But I've just found that for the amount of time that I put into a YouTube video, the trade-off doesn't really seem to be there to have 3 a week versus just have 2 a week, have them perform really well, and allocate my time to other content. And there's still a video on Thursday because I'll be going live answering questions. So that was my thought process there, and just experimenting with it, seeing if it works. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to what I was doing, but I have a feeling it'll work pretty well. And Maddie, I see your question about avocados. Yeah, that's actually one I was thinking. I was like, there's something on the tip of my tongue that I'm missing here. And avocados would definitely be one that I would consider a calorie dense food. I bet y'all can't guess what's in my cup right now, but we'll see. And in general, any sort of fatty food is going to be a calorie dense food. And fat in general is a more calorie dense macronutrient. So protein and carbs each have 4 calories per gram, whereas fat has 9 calories per gram. So That's something to consider as well. And that's why usually when someone's struggling to put on weight, I'll bump up the fat a little bit, even though, um, let's see. Okay, even though fat is not as great of a fuel source as carbohydrates. I lost my train of thought there. I was like, what am I trying to say here? I was like, oh, that's what I was going for. Yeah. Fat is not as great of a fuel source during high intensity activity, but I'd rather you get your calories in than be under eating in general. So it's kind of a balance there. And that's where coaching and individualized nutrition is really important. Thoughts on quinoa versus white rice? Does it matter which one you choose? No, not really. I mean, quinoa is not for those with a sensitive stomach. I'll say that. If you have a really sensitive stomach, you got to be careful with that because if you overdo it, it can get pretty bad. But in general, it's super healthy, and neither one is like better than the other. I would say in a pre-workout setting, I'd probably go with white rice because it's lower in fiber and a bit more calorie dense and carbohydrate dense, so you can minimize any sort of digestive discomfort or something like that. But overall, I wouldn't say you have to choose between one or the other in your diet. Can't wait for the 8-week program. And for those of y'all that missed out and maybe couldn't afford it last time, let's wait for this week. It's going to be fun. I'm excited. I'm releasing a new option for you guys, and it's going to be fun. So I'm excited for you guys to get your hands on that, and I'll be posting more info about that during this coming week. So make sure you stay tuned on my Instagram story, on any social media platform. If you're watching on Facebook, I'll post about it on there as well. But I'm excited for that as well. And yeah, it's cold brew. It's surprising, I know. Cold brew is always in my cup. I'm thinking, I mean, besides, I guess a smoothie counts as a drink, but I really don't drink anything besides water and cold brew. Now that I think about it, like I'm not a huge juice person. I'm not a huge I'm not a soda person at all since like middle school, I think. But overall, I think water and cold brew are the two things that I drink. Not complaining. All right, we got a question from Nicholas asking, hey, coach, in Game Changers, the blood in meat eaters is not as clear as the blood in the plant eaters. Yeah, with that, I forget the exact rationale behind why that was wrong, but look up Marie Spano. She is arguably the GOAT in sports nutrition, and she made a post about this. I forget the exact reasoning as to why that was not the best argument, but just in general with Game Changers, they're notorious for using bad science. And one example of that during the movie was the idea that they tried to say that gladiators were all vegan. And that's one, that's not true. And two, the subgroup of gladiators that, Maddie, can you go ahead and type Marie Spano's name in the chat? I know you follow her as well. I'd appreciate that. But in Game Changers, they were saying that gladiators were all vegan. And a subpopulation in a certain geographical region was vegan or was mostly plant-based, but that likely wasn't because they were like, oh yeah, meat's bad, we're going to avoid that. It was because of their geographical location, and perhaps it was easier or more convenient, or they didn't have access to meat. It wasn't a active choice to not eat meat. So they spun a lot of different things the wrong way. And there was a strongman that they cited as, oh, he went vegan and did this and that. And they forget to mention that he was on roids and performance-enhancing drugs. So a lot of things to consider when watching documentaries. A good rule of thumb is that very rarely will a documentary give you like 100% accurate nutrition information. They do a really good job of entertainment and making it seem as if they're presenting good science and presenting it in a way that's entertaining. I wish they would use that entertainment value and actually apply the science in the correct way. Because if you have something that's entertaining and correct information, that's really good. But oftentimes documentaries are entertaining, but crappy information. So long story short, Nicholas, I would not trust the Game Changers documentary at all, and would not let that guide your decision to go plant-based or not, or go vegan or not. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, I forget the exact rationale behind why the clear blood versus not clear blood was wrong. But Yeah, actually, let me look it up right now. Let me see if I can find that post and see if we can dive deeper into that. And then as we're going, definitely be sure to drop any other questions. Let me see if I can find this. I don't know how deep down it is. 1 second, guys. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, this is why. So overall, the thought process there, or why the blood was cloudy, was not a red meat versus no meat thing. The reason the blood was cloudy was because the cloudiness in the blood was just lipids or fat. And it's more of a matter of having a high fat meal versus not having a high fat meal. That's what makes the blood cloudy. And even then, it's not necessarily a terrible thing. I mean, obviously, you don't want to have a super high fat meal every single meal, but it wasn't a matter of red meat or meat versus no meat. That's the thing there. And they tried to make it seem as if it was the issue of meat versus no meat when it really wasn't. So let me know if that makes sense. And then another question from Nicholas asking, I don't know much about digestion, but I do know to recover, you want the blood to flow. Does that fat in the blood slow down digestion in vegan versus meat eaters? I wouldn't say it slows down digestion. A higher fat meal does digest more slowly, but it's not because of the stuff going on in the blood. It's more so because a higher fat meal empties out of your stomach at a slower rate, and that's what slows down digestion, not really the lipids that are in your blood, because once they're in your blood, you've already digested and absorbed them. So that's not a question of digestion anymore. When it comes to digestion, a higher fat meal does digest more slowly. That's not inherently a bad thing. The one situation where it would be a negative and you would want to avoid a high fat meal specifically is in a pre-workout or pre-game situation. Like, you don't want to have a high fat meal right before you go play, because if you digest more slowly, food's going to be sloshing around your stomach. It's not going to be super comfortable. It's not going to be a really good look. So that's the one situation I can think of that you would want to avoid a higher fat meal. But overall, a high fat meal is not inherently a bad meal. You can have a ton of healthy fats in a meal, and it's totally fine. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, next question we're going to go through is from Maddie asking, so I was watching one of your YouTube videos and you said someone told you to actually go with Gatorade over Body Armor. Could you explain the reasoning again real quick? Yeah, so this was something I learned pretty recently too. Up until recently, I was just like, oh, it's a preference thing. And I think still it's more of a preference thing. But something that I did learn recently was that Gatorade has a better mineral profile than Body Armor. And the mineral profile in Body Armor, which is higher in potassium, lower in sodium, can actually potentially cause cramps. So you probably don't want to go with that during a workout. I would rather you go with Gatorade, which has a better profile of minerals, which have more sodium, less potassium in it. And that'll actually help support performance during your workouts instead of impede it potentially. And both of them are going to have carbohydrates, so you're not really missing out one or the other. So that's what I would go with there. And that's kind of like the rationale. Does that make sense? Paul, what's up? Let's see what your question is. How do you feel about NBA choosing to go plant-based? I know some of them claim to feel like they gain a little bit of an advantage or upper hand. Do you think this could be true for some people? Interesting question. It's a good question. And this is what we call the vegan honeymoon phase. And this is where people say they go plant-based and they suddenly feel amazing and they feel so much better. But we got to look a little deeper here. So what I mean by this is you got to look at the entire diet before and after someone goes vegan. More often than not, going vegan typically leads to an increased intake of fruit and vegetables and a decreased intake of more unhealthy foods like fast foods and processed foods, which is generally a good thing. And that's one of the positives of a plant-based diet. But where people mess up with this line of thinking is they think that the benefit was derived from the removal of meat, when it wasn't. It was derived from the inclusion of more fruits and vegetables and the reduction of ultra-processed foods, not the reduction of meat. So when you look at that, you can actually get the same benefits of going vegan by still eating meat, and you'd arguably be better off because you'd have a higher quality source of protein in your diet, and you wouldn't be missing out on certain micronutrients and omega-3 fatty acids that you would get from animal-based sources. So that's kind of the rationale there. Like, I know Kyrie Irving went vegan a while back. I know a couple other players have tried it as well, and they say, oh my God, I feel so much better. But you got to look, are they still vegan now? I don't think Kyrie is, and I don't think the other people who went vegan are. You can make a vegan diet work. It just takes a lot more planning, and long term, it's usually not a really good look unless you are really meticulous about planning for it correctly. But the reason why so many players say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better, is just because they're eating more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, and they're eating less ultra processed foods. So you can make that happen and still include high quality meat in your diet. So like chicken, high quality beef and steak, and that's totally fine. So don't take their experience as saying, oh, you should go vegan. It's the only way to do it. You'd be better off having a diet that's full of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, all that great stuff, but also including meat. What are your thoughts on trying to eat really clean, no processed foods such as tofu, protein powder, flour, etc.? In general, eating less ultra processed foods and eating more whole unprocessed foods is generally a good idea. I wouldn't go so far as to say you have to have your entire diet be quote unquote clean, because then that usually leads to a mindset of restriction. And when you think you can't have something, when you restrict something, it becomes that much more likely that you have a craving for that same food. So the example I always use, I don't know why I use this food all the time, but I always use the example of saying, if I were to tell you right now that avocados were not good for you and they're terrible for you and you should never have them, and you got to cut them out right this instant, even if you've never had a craving for an avocado, I would guarantee in a couple of days, you'll have some weird cravings for avocados. And that's just because I've told you now that you can't have them. And by the way, this is purely an example. Avocados are amazing. But I would, let's see. Yeah, I would not recommend completely restricting any certain food group or any certain food. I mean, would I go out of my way to have fried food every day? No, I wouldn't. Would I go out of my way to have ultra processed foods every day and every meal? No, absolutely not. But if you enjoy pizza, you enjoy ice cream or whatever, it's totally fine if you have it once a week or even twice a week, just in moderation. And I would much rather you focus on a mindset of addition versus a mindset of subtraction. This is a game changer. So I would, and not Game Changers as in Game Changers documentaries. We don't refer to that around here, but a game changer in terms of the sense that it actually will help you. And why it helps so much having a mindset of addition rather than restriction or subtraction is that when you add the good stuff in, one, you're adding more good stuff in, you're adding more high quality foods into your diet, but two, by adding the higher quality stuff in, it becomes less likely that you're going to have a bunch of junk anyway. So if you're having a high quality protein source with every meal and having fruits and vegetables with every meal, it just leaves less room for fast food and ultra processed foods in your diet. So I would much rather you focus on addition than going through and saying, I'm cutting out fast food, I'm cutting out soda, I'm cutting out candy, I'm cutting out this, cutting out that. And that's kind of the mindset that we want to have. Addition versus subtraction. I feel like the vegan honeymoon phase is low-key a placebo, if that makes sense. I think part of it is, and really any dietary change that you think is going to work for you will likely work for you in the short term. It just becomes a matter of, is it going to be healthy for you in the long term? And for most basketball players and athletes, or anyone looking to maximize performance, going vegan isn't it, because you get lower quality protein sources. You put yourself at risk for certain nutrient deficiencies, which you can account for, but it just takes a lot more planning. And there's no reason to do that extra work when you could just have high quality meat in your diet and be totally fine. All right, let's look at the next question from IG. I think we're all caught up in the comments section. And then in the comments, if you guys have any other questions, go ahead and comment down below and I will get to them. But let's get one from the questions box. And as always, whenever I post memes on Instagram, they go crazy. Like this one got over 200 likes. And It took me 2 minutes to make. Whereas a video I edit for like half an hour gets like 50. I'm like, sick. Like, thanks, guys. But it's funny for sure. Let's see. Someone asked, I think Devin asked, is a high vertical jump really important? I mean, as a basketball player, if you have a higher vertical jump, I would assume it's better than not having a high vertical jump. There's not really going to be a negative there. Is it the end all be all? I don't think so, but it definitely does help. Oh, this is a good one. So Drew asked how to get healthy and get fit while having processed and sugary foods in your house. And this kind of builds off what we were talking about, like the idea of addition versus subtraction. So I would focus on more so just including the better quality foods in your diet, and trying to get protein sources and like lean protein sources, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, things like that in your diet, and do that rather than like thinking about what you can't have. And then again, just moderation. And the key here is you got to think about what foods are trigger foods for you. For some people, if they have one bite of a food, it's game over. They're having the whole thing. Like you have one Oreo, that whole packet's gone. And another person might be able to have one Oreo and just move on with their day and like not even think twice about it. And that's where you got to think about your individual situation. So if you have certain foods where if you have even a little bit, you're going to go overboard and it's just not going to be good, maybe stay away from those. And then include foods in moderation that you enjoy, that you don't feel the need to kind of go overboard in. I don't want to say binge because I wouldn't say it goes as far as binging, but like I wouldn't say, I wouldn't recommend like having foods that you're going to overdo. So for example, like I was saying, one person might be able to have an Oreo or 2 or 3 and eat that in moderation and move on with their life. Another person might have one Oreo and feel the need to devour the whole box or whole package. And that's just an individual thing. And that person who could have the Oreos in moderation maybe has one Snickers bar and from there just devours the whole bag. And the person who struggled with the Oreos can actually have the candy bar. So does that make sense though? Like that's just something you got to think about in the context of your own situation and your own mindset and like your own preferences and stuff like that. So in that situation where you have sugary foods, my first recommendation would be, if possible, don't get as many sugary foods in the house. Like if you have any control over that, if you're living on your own, if you're living in like in a dorm room in an apartment, or you're on your own at this point, you're not like at home with anyone else, then just don't get those foods. Don't have them in your apartment, because if they're in your apartment or in your house, you're probably going to eat them at some point. Now, if you're living with other people, like if you're at home with your parents or with a significant other, then it can become a little difficult because you can't control what everyone eats. It's like someone might want to have Oreos in the cupboard and you can't really control that. I guess one way you could is saying, okay, hide these in a place where I can't find them. That could be a strategy. But in general, I would just say if you know a certain food is going to trigger you to eat a lot of it to the point where you don't feel good and it's just not a good look for you, then in that case, I would maybe stay away from that one and look for foods that you can enjoy without overdoing it. And what basketball player doesn't want a high vert? Yeah, I want a high vertical jump. I think my highest was like a 30-inch, which was like nothing crazy, but it wasn't too shabby. So can't complain too much about that. But yeah, I don't know any basketball player who would not want a high vertical jump. So yeah. All right, let's see. When will the 8-week program be available? Like I was saying earlier, it will be available again sometime this week. It'll be a slightly different format, but I'm excited about this because for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go into that right now just yet, but it will be available again in about a couple of days. All right, another question from Noah asking, do basketball players have to be lean? And in general, holding on to extra body fat is not going to be a really great look. I'm talking like excess body fat. we need body fat to some extent. And I know, Nicholas, I see your question. We'll dive into that in a second. But humans need body fat. It serves functions in your body. So, so with that, you don't want to, you physically cannot get rid of all your body fat. It's just not possible. You would die. But you don't want to go so low in body fat that you lead to negative health effects and you just don't feel good. You don't perform well. But at the same time, you don't want to have so much body fat that it holds you down. Because at a certain point, extra body fat is kind of just like adding weight to your body without any extra benefit. Whereas adding something like muscle is going to get you an extra benefit, is going to allow you to produce more force, get stronger, get faster, more explosive, jump higher, all that stuff that we want. Body fat doesn't really add that benefit for you when you gain that weight. So it's kind of just like, why gain extra body fat? So to answer the question, do they need to be lean? I would say in general, like relatively lean compared to the average person, but not bodybuilder lean. You don't need a six pack to perform really well on the court. You shouldn't have like a beer belly, but you definitely don't need to be absolutely shredded. To put a number on it, usually the sweet spot is somewhere around 8 to 12% body fat. That's a pretty wide range. And if you're a younger athlete, I would even go as far as like 15, just because I would much rather you, even if you're in a situation where you're like 13, 14% body fat and you're like 13, 14 years old, I wouldn't want you to go into a strict calorie deficit to try to get super lean, because you need to grow. And that's something I talked about in the video on the channel, talking about how to grow taller. You don't want to be in a calorie deficit, if possible, when you're going through growth and development, unless you're like really overweight and like medically, like you got to lose some weight just to be healthier. That's fine, but I wouldn't be in a calorie deficit, like a prolonged calorie deficit, if possible, if you're going and developing. So overall, 8 to 12% body fat is kind of like that sweet spot for most like professional athletes. I would maybe go a little bit, like give you a little bit more leeway if you're younger, so that way you could spend more time at maintenance or in a surplus, putting on muscle and getting stronger. So that's kind of, that would be my answer to that one. Did you do Vert Code Elite? Yeah, I have done it. I haven't done it all the way through, to be completely honest. Right now, I started it a couple weeks ago, and then I just kind of got bored with it. Like and it's not the program itself; it's a great program. Like it's super well put together, but just the way I'm wired with training, I'll do something for a couple of weeks and I want to do something else. And I'll do that thing for a couple of weeks and I want to do something else. And right now, I just had the itch to get back into weight training. And there just wasn't a lot of that in the program, which is totally fine. I mean, for the purpose that it served, you don't need a ton of weights and stuff like that. But right now, I'm just kind of trying to enjoy my training. So I kind of switched back to more lifting, but performance oriented. But yeah, overall, it's a really, really good program. If you're trying to improve your vert and like that's the main priority for you, I don't think there's a better program out there. Will asks, what's the best food in between games? So it's going to depend on the time frame that you have in between games. Let me take a sip of my cold brew real quick. My throat's getting kind of dry. It's going to depend on the time frame that you have in between games. So if it's literally back to back, like some tournaments, you'll finish one, you walk to the other court and you start the other game, I would just go with something like a Gatorade or a sports drink, just to really refuel carbs as quickly as possible and keep your blood sugar stable. I wouldn't have a full meal. If you have a little bit more time, like half an hour or an hour, I would go with some sort of carbohydrate-rich snack, like rice cakes can be a good idea. Those little applesauce or like pureed fruit packets can be a good call there. Some sort of energy gel. Those honey stinger waffles can be a really good call there. Some sort of this carbohydrate source that's easy for you to digest. And then if you have a little bit longer, even in that hour range, you might be able to sneak this in. You might want to sneak in some sort of lean protein source just to get some protein in there, support muscle recovery, and support like stabilizing blood sugar levels. But overall, some sort of protein source and carbohydrate source will be a good look. You don't want to go crazy high fat between games because, like we were talking about earlier, I don't know if you were here, but we were talking about earlier, fat slows down digestion. And that's not really what you want before a game, because you don't want food sitting around in your stomach for a super long time. So I would go with some sort of protein source, some sort of carb source, and that'll put you in a pretty good spot. And then going back to Nicholas's question, asking about why does the human body even need fat? So from a dietary fat perspective, we need dietary fat for a number of reasons. Number one It supports cell membrane health. Like every cell has a membrane, and part of that membrane is made up of lipids. So if you throw it back to high school biology class, you got your phospholipid or phospholipid membrane. So part of it's a phosphate group, part of it's a lipid. Lipids are fat, so fat plays a role in your cell membrane health, which is very important. And also certain types of fat support hormone production. So cholesterol in your diet is actually a precursor to steroid hormones like testosterone, which are very important for just overall like men's health and feeling good and building muscle. So that's going to be important. And then also certain types of fat are anti-inflammatory. So omega-3s, for example, that you're going to find in fatty fish like salmon or a fish oil supplement, or even in some plant-based foods, usually not as great of a source, but you can find some in plant-based sources. Again, not as great of a source, but you can. But the point being, they are anti-inflammatory and they do support like fighting against inflammation, support recovery. There's even some evidence to suggest that omega-3s may be involved in muscle growth to some extent. So fat is very, very important, and it's a source of energy in low intensities. Like you don't want to be in glycolysis when you're just going out for a walk. Like you want to be able to burn fat for fuel while you're doing low intensity activity. So that's another function of fat in your body, but it does have a wide variety of functions. And it's not something that you should completely eliminate. And really, all three macros, so proteins, carbs, and fats, have very important functions in your body, and you don't want to cut them out. You don't want to eliminate either one of them, or any one of them, because they all have very important functions. Protein has important functions. Carbohydrates are obviously very important as an athlete. So is fat. Now, I wouldn't go keto and I wouldn't go on a ketogenic diet because you don't need to go that high in fat, but I would try to keep your fat intake around 25% in general, maybe as high as 30, maybe even 35, depending on the goal, depending on your situation. But usually where I start basketball players when they're figuring out their fat intake is somewhere around 25%. You don't really want to go lower than that though, because when you go too low in fat, like I was saying, fat's important for testosterone production and the production of other hormones. So you can actually hurt your hormonal health when you go super low in fat, and super low fat diets are linked with lower testosterone levels. So you don't want to do that. So to clarify, this is from Maddie asking, so to clarify, if we do ever eat a surplus of fats and fibers, we should eat it post-workout, right? Yeah, or just any time during your day. So if you have breakfast and then you train like 5 hours later, 6 hours later, you can have a high-fat meal or a higher fat meal and a meal that has fiber in it. Fiber and fat, like I was just saying, for fat has a number of different functions. Fiber is also very important for a number of reasons. So you don't want to eliminate those completely. I know you're not saying that, Maddie, but just for anyone watching who might get that vibe, like I'm saying, oh, cut out fiber. Like, no, don't. Fiber is super important. You just don't want to do it right before you train. So I would say if you're eating outside of like a 4-hour window before you're training, just include some fiber in there. It's fine. Include some fat in there. It's fine. Just don't, I wouldn't go crazy with it, but that would be my thoughts on that. Let's see. Nemo is asking, I eat white rice at night. Will that hinder my goal to lose belly fat? I work out in the morning 5 times a week. Overall, not really. I'm not a huge fan of eating right before bed, but not for the reason you might think. A lot of people hear the myth of, oh, if you eat carbs after 7 p.m., it's going to turn into body fat. That's not true. The issue with eating at night sometimes is that it might affect your sleep quality depending on the person. For some people, it might actually help, especially if it's carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates, I believe, are some sort of precursor for serotonin, which then when you eat carbohydrates, it helps tryptophan get into your brain easier, which then gets converted into serotonin, which can help you like kind of relax, and it's known as the happy neurotransmitter. So overall, it depends on the person, but I'm not a huge fan of eating right before bed because of the impacts it can have on sleep quality. But in general, I wouldn't overthink it. It's definitely not a bad thing. It's not like it's not a game changer in terms of like, if you do this, you're playing screwed. I wouldn't worry about that. As long as you're in a calorie deficit. And I would also ask, I don't know how old you are. Like if you're a teenager, I would not be concerned with losing belly fat, especially if you're relatively lean already. Like if you're trying to lose belly fat, lose your love handles, whatever the situation is, I wouldn't overthink that. And you'd probably be better off focusing on performance, focusing on muscle gain. Now, if you're, I don't know how old you are. If you're done growing and developing and you do have excess body fat to lose, then the biggest thing is just being in an overall calorie deficit. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're most likely going to lose body fat. Obviously, macros are important, and you've got to make sure your protein, carb, and fat intake is on point as well. But it doesn't matter if you have it at night, if you have it in the morning, or whatever. As long as you're in that calorie deficit, you're going to lose body fat. Another question from Paul asking, when in a fat loss phase, is it okay to only count protein and overall calories, or should you track carbohydrates and fats as well? So in an ideal situation, I would want you to track everything. That's going to be like the gold standard. But if that's overwhelming for you, or you just don't feel like doing it, or whatever the case may be, tracking just calories and protein is totally fine. Now, as a basketball player, the reason why I like tracking everything is to make sure you're eating enough carbs to fuel performance. For general population people, protein and calories is 100% fine. It doesn't really matter what your carbohydrate and fat intake is, as long as you're in a calorie deficit, as long as you're eating enough protein. For basketball players, the same thing generally applies, but remember, carbohydrates fuel your performance. So you don't want to go super low carb. If you know you're eating a decent amount of carbohydrates, I would say, I guess it's fine, but I would rather you track everything if you can. But if you can't, for whatever reason, if it's too complicated, just reach out to me, let me help. But if you just don't feel like doing it, then protein and calories is fine as well, as like a stepping stone. I would start there and then see if eventually you can progress to tracking everything, because it just gives you an extra degree of control over the process. Especially as an athlete, again, you want to make sure you're not going super low carb and giving yourself as much fuel as possible for your training. But for a general population person who's not really training super intensely, just trying to be a little healthier, maybe lose a little bit of fat, tracking calories and protein can totally get the job done. All right, another question from Nicholas asking, my last question, in your book, you say that there's a difference between a diet for basketball performance and long-term healthy. Why is that? So in general, if you're eating to be healthy, it's going to support your performance. When you push for like extremely high levels of performance, like you're pushing yourself to the limit day in and day out, that's really stressful on your body. And the diet required to achieve that level of performance, like a super, super high carb diet, like long-term, not the greatest thing in the world. And that's where periodization is really helpful, because like you're not going to be super high carb all year round, especially as your activity level changes and whatnot. So long term, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you were to eat that way long term, it's not the greatest in the world for overall health. And really, the more you push to an extreme of a given goal, the farther away you move from the other two. So I think you're talking about the whole concept of the triangle of awareness and all that, which is super important to understand. Because as you push towards like extremely high levels of performance, it's not the best for overall health, because again, it's super stressful on your body. Like look at how quickly NBA players age. Like these guys are out here 29 years old looking like they're 45. Like there's a reason for that. They're playing at a very high level and putting a lot of stress on their body. And a lot of times they're not taking care of their bodies as well as they should. So that's kind of what I mean by that. Does that make sense? I know it's a little bit of a tricky concept to wrap your head around, but does that overall thought process make sense? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll go ahead and get to another question from the questions box on IG. Let's see. Here's another question asking, should the last thing I eat before a game in the next few hours be a meal or a snack? I mean, I don't really know what that question is asking, because he's asking, I don't know if you're asking, should I eat a meal or a snack? In that case, it just really depends. But assuming you're eating a meal or a snack, like, yeah, I would recommend eating something. I wouldn't go into the game fasted, like that's for sure. I would definitely get some sort of pre-workout meal in. By the way, if you're wondering how do I do that, I have a whole video on the channel talking about the ideal pre-workout meal for basketball. So definitely check that out. And I've mentioned in a few minutes, so hoopsquiz.com, check that out. It's scrolling along the screen down there. Where is it? Right there, right there. And if you're on the podcast, the link is in the show notes, so check that out. Take the quiz, get the video series, all that good stuff. If you haven't yet, you're missing out. Been getting some really good feedback on that quiz and the video series and all that good stuff. So definitely check that out if you're really serious about being the best basketball player, the best overall athlete you can be, and having your breakout year. Now, to finish out that question, yeah, I would definitely recommend eating something. I wouldn't go into it fasted. Now, whether it's a meal or a snack doesn't really matter. Meal versus snack is kind of just wordplay anyway. Like it's not nothing to overthink, but I would definitely get some sort of protein source in there, some sort of carbohydrate source in there, and you should be good to go. Jared Dudley out here looking like a 60-year-old man. I wouldn't go so far as to say 60, but I mean, yeah, he does kind of look like the dude you see at the Y, like just hooping. I mean, the dude's in the NBA though, so you really can't say anything. The dude's in the league. If you're in the league, doesn't matter if you're the 12th man off the bench, like you're nice. All right, another question is asking, isn't meal prep unrealistic? Like live your life and just keep track of what you're eating. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think meal prep is very important. Now, do you have to do meal prep Sunday every single Sunday? Absolutely not. And you don't need to like meal prep all nice and cute like you see on Instagram. Like that's stupid. But some sort of preparation is very important if you have a very specific goal. Like, yeah, if you're just trying to maintain and you don't have any goal in mind and you're just like, hey, I want to live my life, cool, but more power to you. But if you're trying to achieve an actual goal, same thing with basketball. Like that'd be like saying, oh, go do a workout and just do whatever you want and just live your life, man. Like just work out, do whatever you want, shoot around, just ball handling, like whatever you want. Maybe that might get you a little bit of results, but it's not really going to help much long term because there's no long term plan there. And you're not really getting the most out of that training, out of your time in the gym. So, yeah, I'd say as a starting point, just tracking what you eat can be good, but some sort of preparation is going to make hitting a long term target much easier. So I would definitely recommend some sort of preparation, 100% knowing how to cook, because that's just the super important skill to have. That's what we're talking about this coming week in the 8-week program. We're actually diving into grocery shopping, meal prep, all of that stuff. So it's a really, really important skill to have. Because if you don't, I mean, if you don't have control over it, how do you know you're actually going to get results? And like I was saying, if you're in a position where you don't really care if you're gaining a bunch of muscle or losing body fat or performing really well, you're just kind of chilling. Yeah, you can be a lot more flexible. But if you have a very specific goal in mind, you kind of got to plan ahead because at that point you're just leaving your results up to chance if you're failing to plan ahead. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, like with meal prep, you don't have to prep every single day. You don't have to do the meal prep Sunday or something like that. Just do whatever works best for you. Whether that's one time a week, if you do like meal prep Sunday, by all means, go ahead. I don't like it, but if you do, cool, do your thing. If you want to cook every single day, do that. I'm not a huge fan of that either for myself. I find that 2 to 3 times a week usually works pretty well because it's often enough that you don't have to spend a ton of time in the kitchen at one time, but it's infrequent enough to where you're not in the kitchen every single day. So that's my preference. But again, with meal prep, it really comes down to what you can see yourself sticking to in the long term and what you enjoy and what gets the job done for you. But I would definitely recommend some sort of preparation. Yeah, even the most trash NBA players are on a different level than the rest of the population. Yeah, even just looking at like pro basketball in general, if you're in the league, like that's a whole different level. And it's like it's so funny, man. People who never played before, even like the WNBA, people love to hate on it, but it's like, bro, like they're probably smoking in one-on-one. Like, so why are you hating? Is there any way to use nutrition to reduce acid reflux or not really? Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. My first suggestion would be don't rush when you eat. And that's something a lot of people do. And when you rush, when you're eating in a stressed out state, your digestion is going to be impaired. So slow down, sit down, chew your food. Chewing is the first stage in digestion. Like, it occurs in your mouth, and it's an important step to support digestion throughout the rest of your body. And that would be where I would start. Because usually acid reflux, or like the feeling of like heartburn, is a result of actually low stomach acid. And low stomach acid usually occurs like when you're stressed out or stuff like that. So I would say, try to be relaxed when you eat. Try to chew your food. Take your time. I know at times that's difficult. It's difficult for me, but you'll notice a difference. And that's where I would start. All right, I think we got through all the questions on the questions box. Do y'all have any other questions I can help answer for you guys? Go ahead and comment down below. I'll give you guys a few more seconds and and then we'll start to wrap it up. But let me know, anyone on Facebook, anyone on YouTube, comment down below, and I'm more than happy to dive into any last questions that y'all have. And then, as always, make sure to check out hoopsquiz.com. And there is a new YouTube video up that just went up earlier this morning. I'd appreciate it if you haven't yet. Check that out. Drop a like on it. Drop a comment on it. I'd really appreciate that, because that does help the algorithm and does help the YouTube video get pushed out and stuff like that. So I would 100% appreciate that big time if you go over there, watch it all the way through, drop a like on it, comment on it, because I think you'll find it helpful too. And when you comment on it, let me know you came over from the live so I can show my appreciation. Can an 8-week program help me with my nutrition for Vert Code Elite? Yeah, absolutely. Like, it would be perfect for that, bro. Because really, like I talk about in the video going over how to use nutrition to improve your vertical jump, one of the best ways to do that is to actually just be fueled and fuel properly for your workout so you can get the most out of your workout. So 100%, it would be a great thing to pair with either one of those programs. All right, another question, follow-up question. I'm 20 years old. My goal is to gain muscle mass. I stopped working out for a year and became skinny fat. Should I do a caloric surplus or a caloric deficit? I would start at maintenance and really just focus on fueling performance and maintaining your body weight. And if you are detrained and you get back into training, detrained meaning, like you said, you stopped working out for a year. When you get back into training and you're eating at maintenance, you'll see some pretty cool differences in your body, like gaining muscle, losing body fat, and stuff like that. So I would start at maintenance and go from there. And then eventually, when you see those initial changes, you might want to go into a surplus if you want to put on muscle. And that really just depends on your individual situation. But I would start at maintenance, though, for sure. Are there any foods that can aid in recovery from an intense workout? Yeah, so I mean, overall, just having a balanced post-workout meal is going to be super helpful. So having a protein source, a carbohydrate source, some healthy fat, and some fiber, so some color, fruits and vegetables, getting all those things in is going to be helpful. Also, making sure your total daily intake is on point is going to be huge. It doesn't matter what your post-workout meal is. If you're eating not enough calories overall, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. So 100% start with just making sure your total daily intake is on point. And then from there, make sure you have a really good post-workout meal. Eat plenty of protein. Protein's going to help support muscle recovery and stuff like that. Get plenty of color in your diet. Those antioxidants from food are going to help to fight inflammation and help you recover more quickly and more effectively. And plenty of carbohydrates going to help you refuel after you train. And also make sure that you're not breaking down muscle tissue, because carbohydrates are protein sparing. And that's another benefit from them that often flies under the radar. So that would be my main tips. I mean, there's other things you can do, like potentially supplementing with like fish oil or turmeric or something like that to help fight inflammation. But I wouldn't do that right after you train, because you don't want to stunt that inflammation response right after you train. But those would be my general recommendations. And on top of that, also, if it's a really intense workout, I would get that meal in or a smoothie in or something in pretty quickly after you train, just to blunt that cortisol response and get you down into a recovery state from that amped up state that you're in. Because after you're done training, you're in this amped up, like stressed out state. You want to get yourself down. So Using carbohydrates and using your food to actually bring you back into a recovery state can be a really helpful tactic there. So I would definitely get something in pretty quickly within half an hour. Not from the perspective of, oh, this is going to make or break muscle growth. Not really, but it will help you recover more effectively. And your body is more effective at refueling muscle glycogen sooner after you're done training or done playing your game. So I would definitely go ahead and do that and get that in pretty quickly. All right, and last question for today. Maddie's asking, so would high acidic foods like orange juice and salsa be bad for acid reflux? Yeah, I mean, if you notice you eat a certain food and it triggers that, then I would stay away from it. More acidic foods tend to do that if that's an issue for you. So maybe stay away from them for a little while and test it out later down the line, see if anything's changed. But yeah, if you know any foods specifically trigger the acid reflux, I'd probably stay away from that. What exactly is skinny fat? It's pretty much like exactly how the name sounds. Like you're not super muscular, but you're not lean either. Just look it up on Google. You'll see what I mean. But yeah, you definitely don't want to end up there. And that's why like a lot of people will try to go into a calorie deficit and get shredded, but they don't really have any muscle to reveal when they lose body fat. And they just end up looking skinny and just not the greatest. So yeah, you definitely want to avoid that. And that's where proper nutrition really helps out. If you want to not be skinny fat, get your diet right. But with that, gonna wrap it up here. And as always, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Check out hoopsquiz.com if you're on the podcast. That link will be in the show notes below. If you're on YouTube right now, that link is scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. And it is in the description as well. And make sure you check that out and all that. And then real quick, when to take fish oil turmeric. I wouldn't take it after a workout. No, I would not take that after a workout. Do that at a separate time during your day because you don't want to directly blunt that inflammation response. So yeah, and you can watch the replay of the live. It'll be up really as soon as I'm done. It should upload and be up right away, and you should be able to watch that. But yeah, make sure to check out hoopsquiz.com. Check out the new YouTube video that just dropped. If you're on Facebook, drop a like on this video. If you're on YouTube, drop a like on this video. I'd appreciate that. And again, for the third and final time, I don't even know how many times it's been to this point, hoopsquiz.com. Check it out. And I will see y'all on Thursday this coming week for another round of Q&A. So if you have any questions I didn't get to, or if you think of any questions that come up throughout the week, definitely let me know. Stop by on Thursday. Go ahead and ask them. And as always, I appreciate y'all tuning in.